Hey, this is Adolfo. Welcome back to my podcast. If this is your first time here, what you need to know is that I like to study the past, but I don't want to live in the past. Just 3 days after the Great Chicago Fire, the Chicago Tribune published an editorial on October 11th, 1871, with the headline, "Cheer Up, Chicago Shall Rise Again." And one of the reasons for such optimism was this statement in the editorial, and I quote, "The Christian world is coming to our relief. The worst is already over. In a few days more, all the dangers will be past, and we can resume the battle of life with Christian faith and Western grit. Let us all cheer up." I want to read you the rest of that editorial to put it in greater context. But the Great Chicago Fire was certainly devastating. 300 people killed. And in the face of this, the headline from the Chicago Tribune, "Cheer Up." This is the first Chicago Tribune editorial published after the fire. Chicago shall rise again. And it starts off like this. "In the midst of a calamity without parallel in the world's history, looking upon the ashes of 30 years of accumulations, the people of this once beautiful city have resolved that Chicago shall rise again." And it's got those words all in capital letters. "With woe on every hand, with death in many strange places, with 200 or 300 millions of our hard-earned property swept away in a few hours, the hearts of our men and women are still brave, and they look into the future with undaunted hearts. As there has never been such a calamity, so has there never been such a cheerful fortitude in the face of desolation and ruin. Thanks to the blessed charity of the good people of the United States, we shall not suffer from hunger or nakedness in this trying time. Hundreds of trainloads of provisions are coming forward to us with all speed from every quarter, from Maine to Omaha. Some have already arrived. More will reach us before these words are printed. 3/4 of our inhabited area is still saved. The water supply will be speedily renewed. Steam fire engines from a dozen neighboring cities have already arrived, and more are on their way. It seems impossible that any further progress shall be made by the flames, or that any new fire should break out that would not be instantly extinguished. Already contracts have been made for rebuilding some of the burned blocks, and the clearing away of the debris will begin today if the heat is so far subdued that the charred material can be handled. Field, Leader and Company, and John V. Farrell and Company will recommence business today. The money and securities in all the banks are safe. The railroads are working with all their energies to bring us out of our affliction. The 300 millions of capital invested in these roads is bound to see us through. They have been built with special reference to a great commercial mart of this place, and they cannot fail to sustain us. Chicago must rise again. And that also in capital letters. Now he softens a little bit to recognize the tragedy of the fire. "We do not belittle the calamity that has befallen us. The world has probably never seen the like of it, certainly not since Moscow burned. But the forces of nature, no less than the forces of reason, require that the exchanges of a great region should be conducted here. 10, 20 years may be required to reconstruct our fair city, but the capital to rebuild it, fireproof, will be forthcoming." And actually, though, the city took it didn't necessarily learn the lessons of fireproofing cities immediately after this. The historical records show they were still building with a lot of wood after this fire, simply because it was what folks could afford, homes made from a lot of wood. Anyways, continuing. It says, "The losses we have suffered must be borne, but the place, the time, and the men are here to commence at the bottom and work up again, not at the bottom neither, for we have credit in every land, and the experience of one upbuilding of Chicago to help us. Let us all cheer up, save what is yet left, and we shall come out right. The Christian world is coming to our relief. The worst is already over. In a few days more, all the dangers will be past, and we can resume the battle of life with Christian faith and Western grit. Let us all cheer up. Of course, this same paper did devote stories in detail about the fire, but the main editorial that ran was focused on cheering up. And the man who wrote this editorial, which is the topic of today's History and Christianity podcast, was William Bross. He was co-owner of the Chicago Tribune, and 20 years before the Great Chicago Fire, Bross launched a Christian newspaper called the Prairie Herald with a Reverend J.A. Wright. And Bross also served in the Chicago City Council and as Lieutenant Governor of Illinois. He was a supporter of Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator. Now, Bross also fought in the Union Army in the American Civil War. In fact, in 1863, Bross helped to raise the 29th Regiment, United States Colored Infantry. Now, that unit is interesting for many reasons, but one of them is that it was transferred to Texas and was probably present in Galveston when the Union General Gordon Granger announced emancipation on June 19, 1865. But insofar as his editorial is concerned, I think it shows evidence of a couple of things. First, the Protestant work ethic. That, we're going to rebuild, we're going to work hard, we're going to get it done. It also demonstrates a public faith in Christianity, not a private faith, not something to keep in the closet and keep your mouth shut, but something worthy of mention in the public square. And it also, of course, demonstrates that unbridled American optimism, a can-do spirit that was very, very common in that period. Now, Chicago did rebuild, of course, but the new buildings also brought with them new corruption. It is Chicago, after all. And that's why Gary Chris could write a book called about Chicago called City of Scoundrels. Chicago, the City of Scoundrels. And it's also a city of hucksters and swindlers. In fact, 20 years after the Great Chicago Fire, corruption in Chicago was so bad that's pretty much all an English journalist by the name of William Stead could see. Corruption everywhere. In fact, I have a video about this based on Stead's book that was titled If Christ Came to Chicago, if you'd like to know more. But that's all I have for today's podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and please subscribe so you can find out when the next video will be available.